Give me some sense, if you could, of John's state of mind on what he called the lost weekend. You know, he famously said that he sort of was excited at the beginning because he had never gotten to be a bachelor, and he was going to finally get to be a bachelor, and it was just fucking awful. But when did you know he was coming out to Los Angeles, and what did he tell you? Why?
Was it really 40 years ago?
Yeah. More, right? Yeah. Not quite. 72, 73.
What did he tell me when he came to Los Angeles? 40, it's more than half a lifetime for me.
I mean, it was in the sense that John's not with Yoko, he's coming out. And
Yeah,
he's not in a good place.
I know. I'm just trying to be directly responsive as to when I knew, because I picked him up at the airport. So I picked him up at the airport with May, give or take 40 years ago. And I remember our very first day in Los Angeles when he came here to begin the Lost Weekend. The first order of business was he had no money. You know, you drive out to the airport to pick up John Lennon because he's going to spend some time in L.A. I only learned about it a few days before. Yoko called me and said, look, John's coming out to L.A. I knew that there was some imbalance between the two of them. The circumstances regarding the imbalance, the conversations with Yoko, that's not for me to reveal. But she told me that there were some issues, and he was coming here, and I should look after him, do what I could, and by the way, the flight lands at such and such. So I went to LAX, I picked him up, and the first thing he said was, I need to get some money. And I said, well, you're looking at the wrong guy, you know, but we can go to my bank, because he had traveler's checks. And we drove to my bank on Sunset Boulevard, and he walked in, and he had all these traveler's checks, and he started signing them. So he had a couple of $1,000 to begin the stuff, and I took him to an apartment, a house, Lou Adler's house, where he was going to stay. There came a time, a few days into his arrival, where the two of us had a private conversation. This is what I'm comfortable sharing with you without disclosing secrets. He said she kicked me out and sent me here. I didn't ask why. He said, well, you know, I've never been a bachelor before, so here I am in, he used the phrase either La La Land or Hefner Land or something like that, and he tried to put a fancy spin on it. And I said, well, welcome, and whatever I can do to make the journey more pleasant, I will. And over the course of the months that he spent here, what I call the Lost Weekend, we had more in-depth conversations. This I can share with you. Within 3, 4, 5 days of his arrival, and I spoke with him every single day, or saw him every single day, I can tell you that during the course of the entire Lost Weekend, his only issue was, how do I get back to Yoko? And during the course of those times, I spoke with Yoko virtually every day on the phone. She was obviously concerned about how he was doing. She probably read reports about things that were going on in Los Angeles.
The True, for example.
And I made an agreement with both of them. from the very first day he arrived in L.A., I said, look, I love you both, and I'm not going to keep secrets from either of you. And you're never the winner when you're the guy in the middle. So anything that you tell me, Yoko, anything you tell me, John, I'm going to feel perfectly clear to share with each of you. And I would tell Yoko, well, he believes he's okay now, and he's ready to come back to see you. And she would say to me, no, he isn't. And John would say to me, I want to be back with Yoko. Now, that I can tell you on the record as being true. As to what he said to Yoko on the phone,
that's between them. Interestingly enough, The Lost Weekend is a movie. That's where it comes from. Ray Milland is it's a movie about the disintegration of an alcoholic. And for somebody who is constantly trying to figure out how to get back to Yoko, he sure as shit ain't behaving in a way that is going to prove to her that he's ready to come home.
one can take The Lost Weekend and put a Norman Maine spin on it of a man in a bathrobe walking out into the ocean. One can also say that when one is in enormous pain, one might resort to drink to try and resolve inner turmoils and differences.
It's a low ebb in the man's life.
Pardon me?
It is a low ebb in John's life.
It was the lowest ebb in John's life. He was at his most unhappiest when he was in Los Angeles. Everything was disjointed. Nothing worked. This was a misfit type situation. I mean, look, you know, you're married to Yoko Ono. You're in love with her. Look at the stuff that they shared and did with each other, and then suddenly you find yourself alone in La La Land, with the various women of questionable virtue.
Well, let me go one step further.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that you find yourself with Yoko Ono, but you fucked it up. I mean, figuratively. You screwed up. You got kicked out. You blew it. And you can't figure a way to get back. And the music's not working. Right? I mean...
I don't want to be that hard, harsh, or judgmental about my old friend. Yoko is a severe taskmaster. And Yoko has very, very high standards. And the bar is here. Yoko is the flip side of the coin of a Stepford wife. And you better get it right and walk the walk. So he fell short of the mark. Okay, it happens. It probably happens to every man who I've ever met. But you don't mess up with Yoko and expect to get a free pass. So she felt it was a time for him to engage in some self-reflection. He did.
Let me ask you this question. Harry Nilsson, who was a friend of John's at the time, and Keith Moon, and Jim Keltner was here earlier, these were people that enjoyed drink, enjoyed partying, and everything that I've ever heard from people is that Harry was wonderful when sober and even more fun when drunk. We need some quiet. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Go ahead. Was John the same? Was John, I don't want to say a good drunk, because that's not good for the culture, but was he a good person to be around when he had a few drinks? Did you like being around John when he drank?
There are some people who, when they drink, become a little bit more sparkly and a little bit more colorful, and Harry Nilsson, bless his soul, was certainly one of them. And I was with Harry when he would have his triple Courvoisiers, and he would only become more engaging. And if it were not for my sense of discretion, I could name 20 very well-known public figures who, if you give them a little something, they only make the party more alive and brilliant and beautiful and exciting and tell the grand stories with marvelous aplomb.
Did you like being around John when he drank?
When it came to John Lennon, alcohol went to a place in his soul that made him virtually unrecognizable. And although I loved him as a brother, he was a lousy drunk. And to be around John when he had too much, and in his case, too much may have been 2 brandy Alexanders, you wanted to be someplace else. And I did. And I did.
Why? What was it? What was going on? What would he do?
You're interested in the manifestations?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics. I'm just curious. Was it? Did he get angry? Did he become morose? Was he? Did he weep? Was he angry? Caustic?
As a drunk, as a drinker, I never remembered him being morose. I never remembered him saying, "Elliot, do you have a copy of Only the Lonely by Frank Sinatra? I want to reflect upon lost love." Wasn't that. Did he become depressed and recite passages from Dostoevsky or Visions of Joanna? Didn't do that either. He became verbally combative. Angry, needlessly verbally cruel, and on just a few occasions, maybe physically assertive.
Wow.
Not going to say violent.
Okay.
Physically assertive. There were times that I spoke to him when he had had too much, where he grabbed my tie and pulled me close to his face and shared with me a sense of anger. By the way, big deal. Big deal.
No, I don't mean to paint this as the only picture. I'm just suggesting that.
In direct answer to your question, he was a bad drunk. He was a bad drunk. You would not want to go out drinking with John. That would not be a fun evening. It would be best if you had shared the time with John, share it without the alcohol being part of it. Marijuana, a different experience. He would be extraordinarily charming and pleasant and engaging. That opened a different door in this very large mansion that we're discussing.
Yeah,
but
I don't mean to say that this is the only portrait of John there is, and I did during this time, because that would be a grotesque, manipulation of it, taking a small piece and enlarging it beyond.
correct.
But it is a measure of his unhappiness and the sense that he's adrift. There was, I think, a sense that probably people had of, he's left Yoko. Oh, great, we're going to get John back. He's away from this witch's clutches. And I think as the Lost Weekend went on, people thought, oh shit, you better get back with Yoko because we're going to lose him. I mean, there is, you know what I mean? There's this. I mean, May talks about that weekend like it was great. That time, like she's the center of the universe, and I know that that's her moment with John. But she seems to be the only one that sees it as this kind of Disneyland, this Disneyland kind of like moment.
I know that May Pang views the period of time in Los Angeles as an incredibly creative time for John. And I've read her books, and I've listened to her interviews, etc. And she points to the Caribou Ranch and his collaboration with Elton John and all those things. And from that perspective and that point of view, I can't argue with the things that John did accomplish in L.A. And her reality is her reality, and I have no beef with it. From my perspective, and I was the guy who was there for the Phil Spector sessions, and I went to Las Vegas with John, alone. And I spent the nights in my house or at his place, and I'm telling you that this was an extraordinarily unhappy man who had lost the two things that he loved the most, his wife and his muse.
Talk to me if you can. I'm going to talk over the plane. What were the were you there the night Phil Spector shot the gun? What was the Phil Spector sessions like? Because it strikes me that you have a couple of stories. One about the napkin lady, or Vegas, which was sort of personal
the
stuff.
napkin lady.
And the other is the Spector stuff. And the Spector stuff is like, seems to me like the music has just completely come undone. The thing that was supposed to bring him solace when he's a 16, 17-year-old kid in the Quarrymen, and he started the skiffle group. The moment that, this is the thing that's going to bring redemption in my life, by 73, 74, has completely petered. After the most incredible highs that any musician will ever experience. But by 74, it's just completely crapped out. And you can go back to something like Help as early as 64. And you can see that he's already recognizes that it's not going to fill him. It's not going to be the balm. It's not going to solve the problems. And I think he is aware of that. God, he is aware of that. I don't believe in Beatles. But he doesn't give it up. And by 74, it seems to me, it's just completely come undone in the Phil Spector sessions with the rock and roll album.
What do you mean by it completely became undone in 74?
Well, those sessions lack the professionalism that he always had in the studio. He's drunk. He's showing up drunk and then drinking more. He's not getting an album out of it. They're a mess in terms of what gets recorded. He has to go back to New York and record it sober, basically, in a whole new album. And it's clearly not giving him any. It's not fun. It's not bringing him to a better place. It's actually, as you say, there's no music. It's come undone. It's as bad a place musically as he is personally with Yoko.
Did you dislike the rock and roll album?
I find it sterile.
Really?
Pieces of it, yeah. I love John's voice. I always love his voice. It cuts through everything. But I don't feel in that album alone, I don't feel like I'm getting something true. I don't know why. But I love Walls and Bridges, which is recorded almost exactly at the same moment.
I understand. And, any discussion about art, it's purely subjective. Yes, I attended a number of the Phil Spector recording sessions. Phil Spector was one of the first people I met in Los Angeles in 1963. I met him when he delivered the eulogy to Lenny Bruce. And I've always considered him a musical genius, and John did.
And Plastic Ono Band is, I think, one of the 5 greatest rock and roll albums ever.
Without question.
Absolutely.
Although
But what happened there? What happened in those sessions?
Although the sessions, the Phil Spector sessions at the old A&M recording studio building, a mile from where we're talking. Well, we're talking in New York, I guess. But the Phil Spector sessions, I thought, captured some remarkable John Lennon moments. But if we're talking about rock and roll as an album, and we're talking about John Lennon in terms of his performances, when I hear him doing Stand By Me on the rock and roll album, I think of Help. And I feel the same sense of crying out for both of those experiences. I don't view the Phil Spector sessions as failures. I'm very fond of that album. I know how much Spector meant to John in terms of Spector's recording ability. I also, for the record, know what a strong ally Phil had been for Yoko even after John's passing. And in spite of obvious circumstances, there are few of us who would deny his musical genius. And
I'm not looking to paint Phil as some kind of adversary here, but those were contentious. I mean, I've heard. I mean, Yoko released some of them on the anthology.
Yes.
There's you can hear the tension in the room when you listen to the three little sections even that she released.
Look,
and I think you had more in your radio broadcast.
Phil could be rather tense to be around. You know, I spent evenings with him at his house, you know, with 7 security guards and very large dogs with teeth. And Phil could become a very intense guy. He was a musical genius. The sessions were certainly colorful. Was I there when he allegedly discharged a weapon into the ceiling? I was not there. So I have no personal knowledge of whether or not he did that.
There's no recording of it either, right?
Yeah, I've noted that of all the people who've told the stories, we don't hear the sound of a discharge. There are no photographs of it. There doesn't seem to be, you know, for all I know, it's an urban legend. You know, Phil enjoyed guns, but heavens knows what happens. When I was there, I saw all kinds of people. Very, very famous, well-known people who wanted to come by, participate in the sessions, sing, be part of it, meet John. There was, in many cases, a festive atmosphere to those things. It was not all done in darkness. The manifestation of the Lost Weekend was not all hideous. But that misses the point. The point being that if he had recorded the best album of his life, be it Rock and Roll or Walls and Bridges or anything, that's not the headline. The headline is, he just wanted to go home. He wanted to be with Yoko. If he had some good days in L.A., as May has described, and I'm sure he did, if he had some terrible moments, and I witnessed them, that's true too. But the subtext here is, I want to go home.